A warm welcome to the show. Tonight we'll talk about African art of one of the most recognized artists on the continent. Ibrahim Mahama has just been named the #1 most influential figure in the art world by ArtReview. His large-scale installations provide a powerful commentary on global trade, labor, and economic inequality. Hello and welcome, Ibrahim. Delighted to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And of course, let me start with congratulating you on being recognized by ArtReview. What does this recognition mean to you?
Thank you very much. I think it's a very important platform because it always highlights and showcases people who've made significant contributions to the art world. And I studied in Ghana my entire life. And of course, given the lack of infrastructure also at home and also the deficits and all that, it had always been difficult finding artists who somehow penetrated the art world to a very high level. And it's also very important, at least when you're making art. The point is that you're making it from a local perspective, but it has to have a global outreach. And being named the most influential person means that there are people all around the world are going to pay attention, not just to Ghana, but also to practitioners in the global south. And I think it's very important because, after all, people need to understand that art is not just centered within one place, but it's something that is all around us within the world. And as someone practices within America or within Europe or within Japan, so can someone practice in Congo or in Ghana or in India.
By all means. So let's zoom in on the character of your work. You often work with jute. So what is the significance of this particular material?
The jute is quite interesting because the jute is traditionally made in India and Bangladesh, but it is brought to Ghana for transportation of cocoa. You know, Ghana used to be the highest producer of cocoa in the world. And in the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century, under British colonial rule, the British built the railway in order to be able to extract as many minerals and commodities as they could, cocoa being one of it. And in the 50s, when Ghana gained independence, Nkrumah started building specific social infrastructure, working with Polish architects, Czechoslovakian, Yugoslavian architects during the Cold War period, also as part of the non-alliance movement and all that, the founding of the non-alliance movement. And in the mid-60s, when Nkrumah was overthrown, most of these projects were completely abandoned. Jute became very important to Ghana because we started importing massive amounts of it in order to be able to transport the material, the same material that the British were using in the early 20th century for the exploitation of the material. So for some reason, the material somehow symbolizes the failure of the post-independence period. But at the same time, I also see that there are so many promises in it because there are so many inherent labors in it in terms of the labor that goes into the production of it, the women that use it, like the conditions of farmers in connection to the material. It's almost as if the material speaks about the layers and the histories of ghosts that are buried within it. The Indian writer Arundhati Roy writes that a text about the conditions in Kashmir, and in one part of it, I quote her, she says that the dead are living and the living are dead people pretending. The jute sacks speak to us more or less about the conditions of the world in terms of how capital works and all that through the aestheticization of the material. Whereas sometimes when we see it, we think that, oh, it is old, it is dead, it is tarred, it is torn, it has a wound. But I think all those scars actually speak to us about ways in which we can reflect upon the world that we find ourselves in.
And you also use other discarded materials in your work. So how does the process look like?
Yeah, well, I am mostly interested in materials that seem like they're almost at the end of their life cycle. I like materials that are true and honest in their character, materials that when you see them, they actually speak to you immediately. So I've used airplanes in my work. I've used train parts. I've used headpans. I've used metal tacks from the cocoa bags. I've used the sacks themselves. I've used rubber, glass. So I mostly go around different spaces, sometimes going into old factories and looking for materials which have certain specific characters and histories. But I'm interested in not just one element of that material, but I'm interested in a large quantity of the material.
Let's talk about the Red Clay Studio, because it is your art space, but it's also a space where you exhibit large-scale installations. So what is its significance? Yes. Why is it so special?
Red Clay is a studio that I started building in 2015. You know, when I was in art school, the old curriculum that we were studying, the British curriculum, was more or less about art making as an object. But there was a generation of professors who were more interested in how we could transit art or transform it from a state of commodity as like an object into a gift. So if you're building your studio as an artist, mostly the question is that how does the studio and the processes that happen within it become influential to the society that you find yourself in? More so because a lot of the people within the community, like children and adults alike, most of them are not very much exposed to contemporary art. And most of the artworks that artists make from the global south, it ends up in Western museums and Western collections. So for me, I thought that there wasn't a real sense of justice in that, because art always promises freedom. And what's the point of freedom when you're producing something which inherently has a lot of labor and these ghosts that we're talking about embedded within it, but once it is done, it becomes totally disconnected from the space that it's in. So the studio performs that function. I feel like the studio is supposed to perform that system, is supposed to go into that system of justice where it makes art readily available for any man, woman, or child, or bird, or goat within the environment. The idea is that we're basically making art that is accessible to the public.
How are local people reacting to your artworks?
Well, they're very excited. A lot of them is the first time that they are seeing contemporary art on this scale and on this level. And the fact that it's right in their doorstep, they don't need to pay anything, like they can come at any time, and they can also use the space. So sometimes they come to do picnics. And my studio is like the largest art studio within the sub-region, within the sub-Saharan Africa, I believe. And it's also the most accessible public space in public space. It's private, but it's the most accessible private public space in the whole city where I live, and arguably in many parts of my country. So a lot of people just come there to chill. Sometimes they stay till like 10 p.m. The idea is that people want to have a safe space, and a cultural institution, an artist studio, which provides a space where you can come and reflect, contemplate, and rethink about the notions of life itself. I think it's somehow it's a sense of comfort for people. So people sometimes even come there and give us gifts. They're like, "Oh, I have this object from my grandfather, which we've had in our family's possession for years. Maybe you should have it in your collection, because many other people can be able to experience it." I think that is what we are aiming for. The idea that we can build spaces that collectively all of us can come together in order to be able to share what we have in common.
Right, so there's a strong social purpose to your work. And I was wondering, what projects are you currently working on?
There are two projects I'm currently working on. One of them is I'm trying to build an independent art school in Ghana. So it's very important. The Omenaa Mensah, the Ghanaian Polish philanthropist, and also like who used to be a journalist in Poland, she came to Ghana many times, and quite recently she bought our studio, an institution, a bus that could help with bringing a lot of the school pupils to the studio, which is very important because she also understands the point of the dissemination that we're trying to do, like the redistribution system. So the school is very important. It's one that would allow for us to be able to connect more or less our ideas to many younger people, because we are trying to expand the imagination of, let's say, younger people, whether they become artists in the future or not. The idea is to be able to build something that somehow opens up the imagination of generations to come. And the second part is a project which involves expanding most of the collections that we've made, artworks that I've made, which are in different parts of the world. The idea is to bring all of them into one space so that it becomes a space where anyone from any part of the world, and particularly people here, can be able to experience culture on many different levels. And it also becomes some kind of an endowment to future generations, because I don't think there is any place where you can find a significant amount of one artist's work from the global south within a collection. And I'm trying as much as possible to do that so that I can also use my work as a currency to exchange with other artists around the world, where we can have like international collections where children here can see the works of, let's say, American artists, Polish artists, artists from India or from Japan or anywhere else. It's the idea of bridging that gap between us and the rest of the world.
So let's explore the Polish angle a little bit further. Your works are in private collections here in Poland, as you've mentioned, but they were also exhibited at Zachęta National Gallery. So why do you think your work resonates so deeply with Polish people? What is it about it?
Yeah, I think it's important because Ghana and Poland, we share quite an important history. And in the post-independence era, Ghana, there were a lot of Polish engineers that came to Ghana to work because Nkrumah was a believer of sharing the spirits of the common. And he collaborated, of course, with the Polish states in order to be able to get some things started here. Around that time, of course, certainly also, Nkrumah was also interested in ways in which we could escape the ideology of the Western Bloc, so looking beyond capitalism and all that. And there were Polish artists who were commissioned to do specific projects in Ghana. There was a monument. We did, our Red Clay, we did a collaboration with two Polish artists, Yannick and Max. They did an exhibition at the studio which was titled "No Man Can Rule a Nation." No man can rule a nation, and it was inspired by this monument that was built by this Polish female artist that Nkrumah had commissioned to do a monument in Winneba, in this town in the south of Ghana near the coast, and it was destroyed in the 1966. So the idea was to rebuild a monument and somehow to allow for a certain further excavation of the histories that we share. And the jute sacks, bringing the jute sacks or that work to Zachęta was also a way to somehow open up these shared histories that we have, because the jute sacks somehow have within them the promises that existed within that period, because a lot of the buildings that were being built, some of which were designed by, let's say, Polish engineers and architects with the time, which were completely abandoned when Nkrumah was overthrown. Those buildings were the spaces that the jute sacks inherited, because if the jute sacks, if the buildings was to, for instance, possess the spirits of a nation or possess commodities that were supposed to change the economic tides of, let's say, Ghana and Africa as large, the jute sacks replaced that. So the jute sacks are quite symbolic, but they're also very important in terms of looking at a material that seems so mundane and fragile and trying to see how we can best connect it to, let's say, the spirits of Poland and also the spirits of Ghana. Given where both countries were coming from, particularly looking at Poland during the Second World War and the destruction of Poland within the Nazi period, and also looking at Nkrumah coming to Ghana shortly after that period, and the idea of trying to find a language that could help us to rebuild the image of the world that we're trying to imagine going forward.
So, Ibrahim, 2026 is round the corner. So finally, I wanted to ask you, what are your plans for next year, perhaps dreams for next year?
Well, next year I have quite a number of big projects which are happening. There is a big exhibition which I have at the Fondation Cartier in Paris, which we're working on. And then there is a project which is happening in Denmark in this museum called Maps. And then together with a couple of other proposals which I'm working on, which would only be realized in 2027 and some of the years going forward. So it's actually a year which I'm actually also going to spend on trying to revisit this idea of the art school that we are working on. So I think it will be a mixture of both teaching and also working on proposals and big exhibitions.
Ibrahim Mahama, thank you so very much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you for watching Pulse of Culture. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.